Since I was little, I've always had an inexplicable fear of mirrors at night. I couldn't stay looking at them for long when the sun set, as if something hidden in their reflection was waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. My parents said it was all in my head, a silly fear that I would eventually overcome with time. But something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. One night, something happened. Something that forever changed the way I see mirrors. I was alone at home. The night was calm, but there was a strange feeling in the air, as if the darkness had a different weight. I was in the bathroom, brushing my teeth before bed. The light in the hallway, weak and yellowish, partially illuminated the room. The mirror over the sink reflected the open bathroom door and part of the hallway. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. As I looked in the mirror, something caught my attention. A shadow moved quickly in the reflection, passing through the corridor. I turned around immediately, expecting to see someone or something there. But there was nothing. Just the silence and gloom of the empty hallway. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a play of light and shadow. But when I looked in the mirror again, I felt my heart race. The shadow was still there. And this time, she was closer. There was no defined shape, just a dark, dense presence that seemed to feed on the light around it. My body froze, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at that reflection. It was then that I saw it. The shadow moved again, leaning forward slightly. He seemed to watch me, study my every move. And before I could look away, I saw a smile. A crooked, distorted smile that shouldn't be there. It wasn't my smile. It was something different. Something that did not belong to the world of the living. My eyes widened, and my body went all alert. I turned around again, hoping to find some rational explanation. But there was nothing. Just the emptiness of the hallway. When I looked back in the mirror, the shadow was gone. But the feeling that I was no longer alone remained. I turned off the bathroom light and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was still beating wildly, and the image of that smile was engraved in my mind. Something was wrong with that mirror. Something I couldn't explain. The next morning I tried to forget what had happened. But while I was drinking coffee, I passed the living room mirror and, for a brief moment, I thought I saw movement. I forced myself not to look back. That night, I covered every mirror in the house with sheets. My father laughed at my attitude, but my mother realized there was something wrong with me. "Are you okay?" she asked, with genuine concern in her voice. I just don't think mirrors should be exposed at night," I replied, trying to sound casual. But she frowned, as if she knew more than she was willing to say. Over the next few days, I continued covering the mirrors, and the feeling of being watched didn't go away. On the contrary, it seemed to get worse. I started hearing whispers when I passed mirrors. Indistinct words, but filled with a cold and cutting malice. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise coming from the living room. I got up slowly, my heart racing. When I got there, I saw that one of the sheets had fallen off. The mirror was uncovered. And the shadow was there. In the reflection. But this time, she wasn't just watching. She was smiling, just like before. And, little by little, it began to move. Not inside the mirror, but outside it. I turned off the light and ran to the bedroom, locking myself inside. Since then, I have never looked directly into a mirror at night. Because now I know. Mirrors are portals. And some things, when they see us, also want to be seen. Since that day, I cover all the mirrors before going to sleep. Because what I saw that night never left my mind. And I know that if I look long enough, I'll see that smile again. My grandmother always said there was something wrong with our house. She said, in a low, serious voice, that one of the rooms should never be used. It's an empty room, but it holds things we shouldn't disturb, she used to say. I never quite understood what she meant by that, but her words stuck in my mind every time I walked down the hall and saw that closed door. It was the coldest room in the house, even during the summer. While the rest of the house was warm and welcoming, that room seemed to absorb all the heat, as if trapped in an eternal winter. My family rarely mentioned the place, and if anyone asked about it, the answers were always vague. It's just a junk room, nothing important, my father said. But I knew there was something more. One afternoon, while I was alone at home, a sound made me freeze. Steps. Slow and heavy footsteps, coming from that room. The sound echoed through the silent hallways, each step seemed closer. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was the house adjusting, that's what they always said when strange noises happened. But these steps were not normal. They had a deliberate rhythm, as if something was walking inside. My heart accelerated. Curiosity and fear fought inside me, but in the end, curiosity won. With shaking hands, I went to the door of the empty room. It was closed, but I could see a small crack where the light from the hallway entered. As I approached, I heard a slow, low creak, the door moving, as if it were being opened from the inside. I stopped in front of the door. My hands were cold sweating. "Don't open it," a voice inside me whispered. But I needed to know what was going on. With a gentle push, the door creaked open completely. The room was empty, or at least it seemed to be. The walls were gray and cold, and the air smelled of old dust mixed with something else, something I couldn't identify. A smell that brought a feeling of discomfort. I was about to turn around and leave when something on the ground caught my attention. A note, yellowed with age, was right in the middle of the room. With shaky legs, I walked over it and picked it up. The words written on it were short, but enough to chill my blood. "Come back tomorrow." I backed away quickly, letting the note fall to the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was struggling to understand what had just happened. Who left that note there? And why were they asking me to come back? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise in the house made my heart race. I didn't want to think about the note, but the message kept echoing in my mind. Come back tomorrow. Why? What would happen if I went back? The next morning, I decided to tell my mother what I had found. But when I mentioned the note, she turned pale. Her eyes widened, and she grabbed me by the shoulders. "Did you go into that room?" she asked, her voice shaking. I nodded. "Never go in there again." "Never again," she said with concern, as if my life depended on it. There was fear in his eyes, a fear I had never seen before. "But why?" I asked. She didn't respond. He just turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my questions and my fear. That night, the sound of footsteps returned. But this time, they weren't just coming from the empty room. They echoed down the hallway, stopping in front of my door. The floor creaked under the weight of something that shouldn't be there. I covered my head with the blanket, trying to ignore it. But then, I heard a low, husky whisper. "Come back tomorrow." Since that day, I have never approached the empty room again. And every night, I hear those footsteps. Slowly, they approach, stopping in front of my door. I know you're waiting for me to come back. I've never been a superstitious person, but what happened to me 2 years ago still makes me shudder just thinking about it. I was driving home after a long day at work. It was a deserted road, surrounded by dense trees on both sides. The kind of roads you avoid if you can, but that day I had no choice. The silence was almost suffocating. All I heard was the crunch of tires on the asphalt and the distant sound of the wind shaking the trees. There was no sign of life for miles. No house lights, no other cars, just me and the dark road. As I was driving, my eyes caught something on the side of the road. Initially, I thought it was a shadow cast by the trees, but as I got closer, I realized it was a woman. She wore a long white dress, which seemed to shine in the headlights. She was standing with her back to me, her head tilted slightly to the side, as if she was listening to something I couldn't hear. My mind immediately tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was someone who needed help? But something didn't feel right. She was too still, as if she were part of the landscape. I slowed down, hesitantly. My heart started to beat faster. When I was about to open the window to ask if she was okay, the woman simply disappeared. There was no movement, there was no sound. She was there, and the next second, she wasn't. I felt a cold run down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and accelerated, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. It must have been my mind playing tricks, I thought. But the discomfort didn't go away. It was then that I heard a sound. It came from the back seat of the car. It was a soft whisper, almost as if someone was calling my name. My heart raced. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was no one. The road behind me was empty. Still, the sound continued, a faint murmur, repeating my name as if it came from far away, but at the same time, too close. My eyes kept returning to the rearview mirror, hoping to see something. Nothing. But the whispering didn't stop. I was alone, or at least I should have been. I got home faster than I ever had before. I parked the car, still shaking. When I entered the house, I went straight to the kitchen clock to see what time it was. But something was wrong. My watch was set exactly 1 hour. I checked my phone, same wrong time. Something happened on that road. Something that I still can't explain today. After that night, I never took that road again. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see a shadow on the side of the road, my heart skips a beat, and I wonder, is it still there, waiting for someone willing to stop? My aunt had an antique clock that had been in the family for generations. It was a beautiful piece, with hand-carved details and hands that seemed to dance gracefully on the aged dial. Throughout his life, that watch never failed. He was like a silent keeper of time, marking each second with precision. But everything changed the day my aunt decided to get rid of it. "It's just an old object," she said. "I don't need this anymore." So she sold it to an antique dealer in town. We thought that would be the end of the watch story in our family. However, a few days later, something strange happened. The clock mysteriously reappeared in her living room. My aunt was perplexed. She was sure the watch had been sold. How could I be back? "It must be a mistake," she muttered, trying to convince herself. He took the watch back to the antique dealer, who swore he had never returned it. Even so, my aunt insisted that he keep the object. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, a familiar sound invaded the silence of the house, the ticking of a clock. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls like an unsettling whisper. Confused, my aunt went to the living room, but the clock wasn't there. The sound persisted, getting louder and louder. When he returned to his room, he froze when he saw the clock on his dresser. But there was something wrong, the hands were stopped. The clock showed exactly 3:33 in the morning. She couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the clock ticking in his mind, as if he was trying to say something. The next morning, my aunt decided to throw the watch away. He took him to a dump outside the city and left him there, buried under a pile of rubble. When he returned home, he felt momentary relief until the sound started again. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. The sound came from the bedroom again. Trembling, she entered the room and saw the clock above her bed stopped at 3:33 a.m. This time, she tried to destroy him. He picked up a hammer and struck ferocious blows against the object. The glass shattered, the hands twisted, and the internal mechanism was shattered. But, even destroyed, the sound continued. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. Desperate, my aunt sought help. He told the story to a close friend, who suggested that the watch was perhaps linked to some kind of ancient curse. You shouldn't have tried to get rid of it, he said. Some things need to stay where they belong. Since then, my aunt accepted the watch as part of her life, even though it was broken. He remains in the house, always standing at 3:33 in the morning. And every night, when silence takes over, the sound returns. Tick-tock. Tick-tock. She swears that sometimes, between the sounds of the clock, she can hear a soft whisper, like a voice lost in time. Don't try anymore. When I was a child, my family moved to an old house, the kind that seems to have centuries of secrets in its walls. The house had a small, barely noticeable attic, hidden by a weathered wooden door. My parents never talked about the place, and I knew something was wrong by the way they avoided the subject. The door was always locked, and my father said it was for security. There's nothing up there you need to see, he'd say. But one night everything changed. I woke up suddenly, feeling the cold early morning air seeping through the cracks in the window. There was almost absolute silence in the house, but in the midst of the silence, a faint, distant sound made me shiver. It came from the attic. It was like a whisper, low and incessant, as if someone was whispering secrets that weren't meant to be heard. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe the wind or an animal on the roof. But as I paid attention, I realized that this was not something natural. The words were indistinct, but there was an urgent, desperate tone to them. Curiosity took over me. I knew I shouldn't, but I needed to see what was happening. I took a chair from the kitchen and took it to the hallway, positioning it under the attic door. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum in my ears. As I climbed onto the chair and reached for the door, I felt the air around me grow colder. There was something strange there, something that seemed to be watching my every move. As soon as my fingers touched the old brass handle, the murmuring stopped. The silence was so sudden that it made me catch my breath. For a moment, everything was too quiet. Then, a clear and distinct voice broke the silence. "Come on, open it." My hand froze on the doorknob. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a frightening authority, as if it came from somewhere very far away, or very close by. My heart raced, and adrenaline took over my body. I got off the chair so fast I almost fell, running back to my room without looking back. I threw myself on the bed, hiding under the covers, as if that could protect me from whatever it was. I tried to sleep, but the voice kept echoing in my mind. What was in that attic? Why couldn't I open the door? The next morning, at breakfast, I worked up the courage to ask my mother about the attic. "Mom, what's up there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But my mother froze. She dropped the coffee cup on the table with a slight tremor, and her face turned pale as wax. "You didn't touch the door, did you?" she asked with a concern that scared me. "No. I didn't open it," I replied, but I couldn't hide the guilt in my voice. She looked me in the eyes, and the fear I saw there made me shiver. "Never open that door," she said firmly. "Never." I wanted to ask more. I wanted to understand what was happening, but something in my mother's expression made me step back. For the rest of the day, she avoided any conversation on the subject. But that night, I heard it again. The whispers returned, louder and more desperate. This time they said my name. "Come. Open the door." The voice mixed with the wind, and I no longer knew if I was awake or dreaming. But one thing was certain, that attic hid something. Something that wanted out. I don't know what it was, and I may never find out. But to this day, whenever I think about that house, I feel the same chill down my spine that I felt that night. And the worst of all? I can still hear, in my nightmares, that voice whispering, "Don't open it.